In this 7th episode of this movie-length DVD on how to prepare for the end times, we will examine the coming last days economic collapse. It will be the 4th wave of catastrophe that God permits in the end times. It is not surprising that after the catastrophes we've already looked at in previous parts, war, chaos, and natural disasters, after these things wreak havoc on the earth, that the means of economic development will be greatly curtailed. At that point, economic collapse is inevitable. So it's no surprise that Jesus warned an economic disaster will follow. And as we have seen with every other form of catastrophe, in the end times, God will use these economic stressors to bring the lost to himself. God will use the economic collapse, but so will Satan. He will use it and every other wave of catastrophe to propel his man, the Antichrist, into a position of power. First, he will use deception and great signs and wonders, as we learned about in episode 4. Next, he will use the Antichrist's ability to wage war. Notice what the people will say. Who is like the beast, and who can fight against it? In addition to terrorizing the world, the wars and chaos will also deplete the nations of their economic strength. And the economic collapse that follows will be the final blow that allows the Antichrist to take power. He will literally tip the scales in his own favor. In the book of Revelation, we read about a future price-fixing scheme. A voice that is probably the Antichrist's cries out, "A quart of wheat for a day's wages." In most Western countries, a day's wages is $100. This then is the equivalent of 2 loaves of bread for $100. Who could live under these conditions? So in the Gospels, Jesus simply states that there will be famines. Not that there might be, but that there will be. And the Antichrist's price fixing of 2 loaves of bread for $100, well, that will probably bring it on. Then the Antichrist will offer a solution, an evil solution. But that will seem better than starvation to many. And this will likely launch the man of sin into world domination. But Jesus gives us a different solution. When he completed teaching about the signs of his coming, Jesus began to show his disciples how to apply what they learned. In the first parable, he asked a question, almost a riddle actually. Who was his faithful servant? Jesus gave us 3 clues. The faithful servant was a slave. He was put in charge of his master's household, and he provided food at the appointed time. Any idea who this was? It's Joseph, who was a slave in Egypt, placed in command of Potiphar's house, and whom God later used to provide grain during the famine. Jesus is telling us, by means of this riddle, how he wants his servants to act during the end times. He wants all of us, especially our leaders, to act like Joseph. Notice what he also says, to give them their food at the proper time. What is the proper time? Or, as the actual Greek word says, the appointed time. It's the time of the end, of course. It will be during this prophesied famine that the faithful will provide food for God's people. God wants us all to be Josephs for his people during the famine to come. And why might that be? Well, besides the obvious provision of physical needs, it will have a spiritual implication as well. At some point, the Antichrist and false prophet will institute the evil solution we had just spoken of, the mark of the beast, probably also during this famine. No one will be able to buy or sell without it. Yet everyone who takes this mark is eternally damned. It is the classic between a rock and a hard place. However, Christians who have stockpiled food for this exact appointed time will be able to share with their neighbors who desire to avoid taking this hard mark. In this way, Might they be able to resist the temptation to take the sign and instead remain faithful? But how long will our stored food last? Isn't this just a pipe dream? No, I don't think it is. Let's consider the feeding of the 5,000. Jesus fed a multitude, and I think he will in the end times as well. But he did it after a great act of faith. Who was the faithful one? He was only a boy, but a boy who remembered to pack his lunch. And although he was as hungry as everybody else, he gave all he had to the Lord. And it was these very loaves and fish that Jesus multiplied. In the end times, if we give all that we have away, will Jesus multiply our gift? That is my opinion of what the heavenly economy is all about. So I think it will be very likely. So in my opinion, this is how we prepare for the famine and economic collapse of the end times. Not by putting away supplies for our own family and friends, but in anticipation of giving it away. God will provide, but we must not presume upon him without taking some action of our own. Pack a lunch, give it away, and then expect God's miracle. My family and I rent a storage unit and have filled it with food, and we have dug a well in our yard and also have portable filtration systems for water if we're forced from our homes. These are our acts of faith. This is how we've packed a lunch. Jesus said there will be famines, and we take him at his word. Now, if one family can do this, what can your entire church do? But honestly, what are they doing now? Are they trying to be Joseph? Or are they presuming upon God? So, does Jesus want us to be preppers? Yes, in my opinion, he does. His word says so directly. He wants us to be Josephs. But not to be survivalist preppers, looking out only for ourselves. He wants us to provide for his entire household, to give it all away for the sake of his kingdom. And in that faith, I believe we will see a miracle. Now, the next episode is a special one about a special group. Click on the link to keep watching.